about Workbench Pro is that you get much more options in your tools, and significantly you get the new JCI Station option. And that's what we use to create a JCI station. If you go New Station here, which you get in both versions of Workbench, that's a new Niagara station, and it won't necessarily have all of the Johnson Controls modules included. So when it comes to adding BACnet devices, you won't be able to import the CAF file and various other things. So it's important that you go New JCI Station underneath the Tools menu. So we've done that yesterday, and we now have our station running on the platform on my PC. Okay, so looking at the Workbench layout, we have a file menu, and the most useful option here is we have the option for a new window or a new tab. If we choose new tab, we create a second tab that we can then put, if we double click alarm, it loads it into that tab, and now we can have two tabs open at the same time. When you select the tab, this is the path up the top here for that location. So if I go down to here, Facility Explorer Custom Control, double click, that's my path, and that's what's being displayed in this tab. I go back to here, this is the path, and that's what's being displayed in this tab. If I now double click the route, I'm displaying the route in this tab, and I'm displaying custom control in this tab. So you can have two tabs open so that you can switch between them. Okay. Similarly, you can go File, New Window, and it'll open a new FX Workbench window, which it did on my other monitor. And I've just dragged that across so you can see I've got my original window and I've got a new window, and the same thing here. I can navigate around and call up the same things. Yep. And again, I can switch between two windows. So multiple tabs or multiple windows are both ways that you can look at two things at once. So I will close this second one so we don't get confused. Now we're back. So that's File, New Window, and New Tab. Likewise, you can close tabs, close other tabs. You can navigate between your tabs and so on. In the File Open option, you can open a platform or open a station. So if you choose to open platform, it'll prompt you for the IP address of the platform you want to open. So that would be the IP address of the FX80 that's sitting on this network, or if I wanted to go to my PC, I could type in localhost, and I would open the platform on my PC. Okay, and there's two ways I can connect to a platform. I can connect using secure connection, which has got the little green padlock, and that requires HTTPS communication, and it involves certificates and a secure connection. If you choose the other option, then it's an unsecure connection. It's just using plain HTTP connection. Okay, there's no certificates involved, and the communication is not encrypted. Okay, So in most cases, you could use secure. The benefit of not secure is that it's a simpler connection method. And if you're having trouble with your certificates, it might be easier to connect with the insecure option. Yep. When you connect to a platform, you're connecting via a particular port, an IP port. The default is 3011, okay? And that's the standard port for platform. So the only time you would be using a different port number is if you've specifically gone in and changed it, okay? So if I make a port connection to the platform, this is what I would be connecting to. Okay. These grayed out options here on the tree, these are platforms and stations that I've connected to in the past. So if I successfully connect to a station, the IP address gets saved in memory so that if I ever have to go back there, it'll be sitting there waiting for me to connect. So there's nothing significant about these items listed here other than they're stations that you might have connected to at some point in the past. And if you don't like them being there, you can always right click and I think it is close. And that will get rid of that particular item off the tree. And now it's gone. If I ever have to go back, all I do is go File, Open Platform, and away I go. And I put the IP address in and I'm away. Okay, so that's the file menu. The most useful ones are at the top there for opening platforms and stations or opening new tabs or new windows. Okay. The edit menu has got the typical paste special, duplicate, copy, cut, and so on, undo, redo. You can search for files or search for objects. There's bookmarks. There's the tool menu. So far we've looked at new JCI station. There's just managing the different windows. Now the fact that we've got a wire sheet displayed here, we have a wire sheet menu option up here. And then finally you've got your help. You open that up, you'll get Workbench help listed. And the way this works is you have a document for every feature. So there's a document for Modbus. Okay, and you can work through that. It takes you through how to configure the Modbus client network. It takes you through it all. And so on. So if you're stuck for details, you can always go here. Those same documents are also listed on your C drive. If you go C drive, JCI, so the JCI directory is created whenever you install FX Server or FX Workbench. And if you go to a particular version, and then there'll be a folder called Documents or Docs, and there's a document for each feature. So Modbus, folder, and then in there a PDF called Doc Modbus. Now they're typically still listed as AX, but everything that worked, so the AX to N4 didn't really change the underlying structure of how everything goes together. So you can safely ignore the reference to AX. It'll apply to N4 as well. So if you work through this, it just takes you through. It's fairly technical, but it covers how to set up networks, everything you need to do, need to know is in here. It might be a little bit hard to find, but this is the ultimate document that describes the Modbus network and how it's implemented. Okay, and there's one of these for BACnet, there'll be one for MBus, and so on. So if we go back, we found that by going to JCI, then the version, and then the docs directory. And then underneath that, there should be a directory for each feature, in this case, doc modbus, and then a PDF called docmodbus.pdf. Okay, so that is one way to access it. Another way is via the FX Helps system. Okay, now we get back to Workbench. So then we've got our toolbar. Below the menu, you've got your forwards and backwards buttons that just navigate you backwards and forwards. There's the taking you up one level in the tree. So then we have the sidebar. So this panel on the left here is the sidebar. If I say show side, untick that box, I've got no sidebar. Okay, so this just brings it back and determines what gets displayed. So the most helpful sidebar is the nav sidebar. I just created a second instance of that nav sidebar, so I can close it. I can also, another helpful one is one called palette, and I'll use that later on for when we create graphics or when we do wiresheet. So if you need to add items to your station, you typically use a palette for those items. Okay, so that icon there on the toolbar lets you show the sidebar and lets you add or open or close different items in that sidebar. Yep. There's a home button, there's a refresh, and so on. So these ones to save, when you make changes, the save option will come up. This is the toggle edit, so lets you edit a graphic. And then this last option here lets you view the graphic as if it was in a browser. Okay, so in this instance, that graphic can't be displayed in a browser. So we go back. Now, so that takes us to, we'll close this palette. So that takes us to our station. The most useful part of the station is in the config folder. Okay, and this is where you basically configure or defines the configuration of the station. And it consists of services, drivers, and a folder called Facility Explorer. So everything that gets done within the station is sort of managed by a service. So there's a service for the users, there's a service for alarms, for email, for history, audit. Just about every feature has a corresponding service. Now, some services have a lot of inputs and outputs, a lot of properties. Others have very little at all. Some of these are just a placeholder for a specific service. So the first service we'll look at is the user service. We can expand that out and we can see at the moment there's two users have been defined, one called admin and one called backnet. If I double click the user service, it displays on the right hand side, and if I look at the top right, I see the view AX User Manager. So that's the view that I'm seeing right now. If I drop down that list, I can look at different views of the same information. If I look at the property sheet view, I see the same information, but as a property sheet. So there is always a property sheet, and it will always have all of the properties listed for this particular item, in this case, the user service. And so this admin user here is a property of the user service. And if I expand out that page in my property sheet view, I see the properties underneath that user. Similarly, if I double click here, it goes straight to the property sheet view for that user. And again, I've got different options, but I don't have the options are different depending on what I'm looking at. So when I looked at the user service, I had this special view called the AX User Manager. And that's what's being displayed right there. And so this is designed as a helpful view so that if I wanted to add a new user, I could do it. So I click on the new button, add a user, go OK. I give him a name like tenant 1. I can give him a full name. I can give him a role. In this case, I'll choose tenant. And I can give him a password. I can give him an email address and so on. So I can fill out all of his details and I can go OK. Didn't like my password. So there I've created a new user. Okay, so if you created a job, part of that process of possibly handing it over to the customer is you set up the customer's logins, their users that they're going to use to access the system. Okay, so if we double click that user that we've just created, we can go through the various properties that we have for that user. So things like the username and password, force reset at the next login. So that's a fairly standard feature. If I set that to true, next time the tenant logs in, they're prompted to change their password. The idea being that you create a new user, you give him a password, but when he first logs in, he changes the password. So you no longer know what his password is. Okay. Another option in here is the nav file. So we'll talk about that in detail later, but the nav file determines what this particular user will see when they log in. Okay, so by default we create a tenant nav file automatically, and if I choose that, then my tenant has a tenant nav file that determines what they can see. Okay, so I save that. If you wanted to, you could have set up prototypes for your users, and the list of prototypes is what appears under here. Okay, so if I choose the default prototype, I'm choosing what's defined under here and applying it to this new user. Okay. The network user means that this username and password is distributed to all Niagara devices on the network. Okay, so they can log in here. They can also log into the FX80 that's underneath this on this same site. Yep. The role. We've chosen the tenant role. The roles are set up in the role service. Okay, so this list of roles here is this list in the role service. Okay. You can be in more than one role, and there's more than one way that you can do it. So you can either select the role here, or you can use that icon to pop it up and edit it that way. So the role, concurrent sessions, can you log in more than once at the same time? Log off after 15 minutes in this case. Then we have a web profile and a mobile web profile. So if you connect to the server using a browser on a desktop machine, this web profile will be applied. Okay, and there's some standard profiles available. So HTML5 HX profile is the standard one you'd use the most, but you've also got default Workbench web profile. So where it says Workbench, it means that you will see this Workbench interface, but it will be rendered inside a browser. Now this is using Java in the browser, and it's left over from the AX days, okay? And so for this to work, you need to use a thing called Web Start, okay? And we will talk about that later, but Web Start is a way of launching the Java application on your PC so that it runs rather than having to run it inside a standard browser. Okay, so we'll go back to HTML5 HX. So that's using HTML5, and so it'll run on any browser or any modern browser. And you've got the options when you choose that profile of how it will be displayed. So all of these references to a tree are referring to the tree on the left-hand side. Can you see the nav tree? Can you see the config tree, files tree, and so on? So config, is that config visible, and so on. So you can control what the user will see when they're logged in with a browser. Okay. So that's your web profile, which applies when you're connecting in with a browser on a desktop computer. Okay. Down here you've got your mobile web profile. Okay. And that's you've got a much smaller list of type of profiles because Java is not an option on a mobile web device. Yep. And again, you get to choose what gets displayed. So that's the user. Now, in here we had the nav file for the tenant. Down here we have a requirement for a mobile nav file. So in there, you could have a separate nav file for mobile connections. So this is when you connect with a browser that's running inside a mobile device, like a smartphone or a tablet, okay, which is different from your standard web profile, which applies when you're connecting via a desktop. Okay, so you can control how the navigation is different for those two different ways of connecting. Okay, so that's the user properties. We got that by looking at the property sheet for the user we just created. If we went in and created a user and we're happy with them, we've made all those changes, it works how we expect, we can come along here later, right click on tenant 1 and duplicate and create tenant number 2 with exactly the same features, same properties, everything the same. You would then go into tenant 2 now give him a new password, confirm it, and away you go. So as part of that, we talked about the role that you have. So if we look over here at the role, so when you create the user, you nominate a particular role, one or more roles. Now, if we look in the role service, when we double click the role service, top right, we see the role manager view. Or we can see the permissions browser, or we can see the property sheet. Okay, so let's have a look. So the role manager really only helps if you want to create a new role. So if I create a new role, and I call it, say, a level 5 tenant. Okay, so I want it specifically a tenant on level 5. I can set up his permissions. Okay, and we will go through that later, but I could create a category just for level 5 and give him full rights to that category, but no other permissions on anything else. Okay. So I've just created the level 5 tenant. If I look at my permissions browser view, we've got the various roles that have been created, the operator role, the maintenance, the tenant, and the level 5 tenant. And I can expand out my station. So this here is mimicking this station here. So there's the config. Under config, we've got services and drivers and facility explorer and files and so on. If I expand out services, the operator has read and write privileges for all of the users except the admin user. The maintenance role has the same, the tenant role has the same, but the level 5 tenant doesn't. Okay, and so on. So you can control down to individual objects as to what people can and can't do based on their role. Okay. So this is the role service. Where the other part of the role, so users and roles, is the thing called the category service. Okay. Now, every object that gets created inside a station belongs to a category. Okay. So as I expand out the system, you can see what each node on the system belongs to. So all of these users belong to the configure category. And they belong to the configure category because they inherited it from the user service, which belongs to the configure category. Okay. The admin user is a special case, and he belongs to the user edit and the edit categories. And he doesn't inherit from the user service. He's got his own specific details. So if we look at a different node, say in drivers, the BACnet network, the BACnet network is in the view category. Okay, so that means that anybody who has access to the view category will be able to see and do things to the BACnet network. Okay. Similarly for the Niagara network and the Modbus network. And everything underneath BACnet network inherits what the BACnet network node has. So if I add the operate category to the BACnet network, everything below there inherits that same assignment. If I take that out, it takes it out from everything below it. Okay, but if I went all the way down here to this item and I took away the inheritance and I made it a special category 8 item or category, assigned it to category 8. If I make changes here, sorry, not there. If I make changes here, these are inherited, but this one does not inherit from its parents anymore. It's got its own unique set of category allocations. Okay, if I go and tick the box to inherit, it now goes back to being exactly what its parent is. Okay. So that's the category. If you wanted to, you could use an example where you'd use the category service is by creating a category just for level 5 users, for example. So if the tenants on level 5 want to be able to request their after-hours air conditioning, then you could create a category just for them. And one way to do that is to right-click and duplicate this and call it level 5 tenant. Okay. And then if we ever created a, just say over here in our custom control area, if we created a new folder called level 5, okay, so level 5 tenant is actually category 7. So if we make this guy we go looking here, level 5 is now in category 8, which is this category that we created down here. Now, I'm not sure why that hasn't refreshed up the top there. That's why it is. That's better. So there's our level 5 tenant. And if we go down and find that folder that we created before, we now can assign it to that level 5 tenant. Okay. So what that means is that in order to view this folder and to interact with the items inside that folder, you have to have permission for the level 5 tenant category. Okay, so in our level 5 tenant role down here, we gave you full permission for everything in level 5, but no permissions for anything else. Okay? And that means that up here, when we define you as a tenant, we can tick that option, which means you're now a level 5 only tenant. You only have access to things that belong to the level 5 category. Okay? So is there any questions on any of that? It's all fairly heavy stuff, and hopefully it'll become a little bit clearer as we go along, but that's explaining how how you control what a user can and can't do. Okay. And the only time that you would need to get involved with this in any detail is where you want to do something specific, like setting up an interface where just a particular group of people can do a very particular set of things. So if it's just a standard BMS where you've got normal operators who are going to come in and operate the building, then you can use the standard roles that come already set up, like admin, operator, maintenance, and tenant. So those standard roles are there by default, and they give you standard set of things that you can do in what would typically make sense, whereby the admin role lets you do everything. The operator role lets you do just about everything except manage the admin login. The maintenance role lets you do maintenance type tasks where you can view things, command things, but you can't change things. And then tenant is a view only role. So those roles are built in, and their access is created automatically as you build out the system. You may want to go back once the job's complete. There might be some areas where they want to restrict or change who can do what and where, and for that you use the category service to decide who can, what each particular node in the system who has access and what can they do. Okay, so that's the user service, the role service, and the category service. All right. So a couple more services that are useful or that you'll probably interact with is the alarm service. When I double click the alarm service, I'm looking at what's called the wiresheet view. Okay, so every node has a property sheet and nearly always has a wiresheet. So with a wiresheet node, you're seeing all of the child objects are on a wiresheet that allows you to make connections between them. Okay, so in this case, we've got an alarm console that displays alarms, and then we've got some alarm classes. Okay, so every time you create an alarm, you allocate that alarm to a class, and the alarm class determines how the alarm is handled. So if you have a group of critical alarms, then you would create an alarm class called critical alarms. So if we wanted to do that, we could pick an existing alarm class, right click and duplicate it and call it critical alarm class. Okay, so these alarms, anything that's in the critical alarm class, is going to be extra critical, right? So what you could do then is create an alarm console. So if we double click, this is an alarm console, and it lists all of the alarms that are currently active. Yep, and I can select that and I can acknowledge it. I can select that one and acknowledge, and I can acknowledge that one. So I've now acknowledged all those alarms. It should stop making a noise. And if a new alarm occurs, it'll appear in this alarm console. Now I could duplicate that alarm console and call it critical. Critical alarms. Okay, so now I've created a console purely for critical alarms. Now, when I go back to my wiresheet, this is my alarm console sitting there waiting to receive alarms. Any item that's in the critical alarm class, I'm going to route the alarm to the critical alarm console. Okay. So if it's just a default alarm or a JCI alarm, it'll go to the normal console. If it's a critical alarm, it'll go to the critical alarm console. Okay. Now, if you look we right click on here, there's a thing called pin slots. Which basically shows me what lets me expose additional connections to this object. So what I could do there is something like that. What this says is escalation level 1 is after 5 minutes, level 2 is after 15 minutes, and level 3 is after 30 minutes. And if I enable all of those escalations, what we can say is after 5 minutes, escalation 1, after 5 minutes, if the alarm hasn't been acknowledged, it'll get escalated and sent to the critical alarm console. Okay. And likewise, after 15 minutes, you could send it somewhere else. And after 30 minutes, you could send it somewhere else. So every alarm class has those options. So to make them available for connection here, I right-click and choose pin slots. And this basically says, if I pin these slots, it makes them available for connection. Now, I could also bring the enabled flag and make it available as well. And so if I said after hours, if it hasn't been acknowledged within 30 minutes, I want you to do something else with it. I could do that by setting up a schedule that enables escalation level 3 during after hours. Okay. So you get a whole lot of flexibility on how each alarm class is handled. So in our wiresheet view here, we can see these connections that are all occurring for objects that are on this same page. But if you look here on this item here, there is a little black dot. If I can click on it correctly, and this is always a bit difficult. So if I delete that connection and it leaves behind this connection here, if I right click on that, well, just by putting my mouse over it, down at the bottom of the screen, you might not be able to see it, but down the bottom of the screen, it shows me where that link is going. So that's a link to somewhere else in the station. If I right click, I've just gone to that link. I've navigated to that link, which is in the email service, and it's linking into an email recipient. Okay, so in my email service, I've got an email recipient, which is this item here, and it's linked. If I go to that link, that's the link there. So this JCI alarm class will send its alarms to the alarm console, but it'll also send its alarms to this email recipient set up in the email service. Now, just say I wanted to send my critical alarms as an email. Okay, so if I go to my email service, the first view I see is the email account manager. And in here, I get to set up the email account that I'm going to use when I send email alarms. Okay, it's got a name, a type of email, the email server I'm going to connect to, the port that I'm going to use. Am I going to use authentication? If I do, then I have to have an account name and a password. And then is it going to be secure SSL, or is it just going to be plain text, which is SSL false? Okay. And how often will I check for alarms? Every minute. Okay. So most important thing in this page is the host name. So that's the name or the IP address of the email server that we're going to connect to in order to send this email. Okay. So I can have more than one account if I wanted to. But typically you would only have one outgoing email server that you use. Okay.
Hey David.
Yeah. Hello. Hello.
Hello, sorry, Ardian
Yeah,
speaking.
right. Yeah.
Yes, regarding the email service,
Yep.
can you create the example? Let's say we will sending using the Google email or something.
Yep. Okay, so if it was Google, then the email account would be, so how would I do that? So it would, if we, I would go, right, so what we're doing is we're setting up an SMTP server connection to Gmail. So smtpgmail.com. .gmail.com. Okay. So copy that. So that's my host name. Yeah. Port number for SSL is 465. And they're saying they want to use SSL. Okay, so it's saying requires authentication, yes. So that means that we would have to have an account and a password in order to send an email via Gmail, okay? So you would set up your, so your user would be whatever your username is at gmail.com, and that would be the password for that Gmail account. Okay. And we want to say use authentication true. Okay. So that's my outgoing account.
Hi, David.
Yep.
Can you show the Microsoft Outlook as well? 365.
So again, it would be, so what we're doing here is we're just setting up a standard email client, right? So if you set up Outlook, as part of that process, you connect to an email server with a username and password and a port number. So again, I would, was it what is it called? Office 365, yeah?
Yeah, Outlook 365.
Yeah. So it would be that. Five, 8, 7. And then this would be your account name and password. So you'd need to have an account that this is going to recognize, yeah?
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Yep. And yeah, so now we've got this outgoing account. We can probably rename him as Gmail. Okay. So if I, in my email service, I've got my email recipient. So if I right click and copy that node and then go to my alarm service and paste it, I've got my email recipient here, and then I can take my critical alarms. They're going to the critical alarm console, but I could say after 15 minutes, I'm going to send them to my email. So if they're not acknowledged within 15 minutes, then they will get sent to the email recipient. And if I double click this email recipient, in here the email account, I choose Office 365, right? Because that was, that list in there is this list of email accounts. So typically there'd only be one. In most cases there'd only be one, but there might be a situation where you've got two different what you've got different accounts for sending different emails. For most cases, there would only be one email account. So I'll choose that one. And this is where I nominate who's going to receive it and their email address. If I wanted to send it to 2 people, I can do that. Okay, I can CC it to Ben's boss. I can blind CC it and so on. Okay, the email itself will have the subject Niagara alarm from, and then the data source name, the alarm data source name. So when the alarm arrives, it's got a field called source name, which normally is the FX80 or the FX server that the alarm has come from. That would be inserted in there. Okay. You can change this to whatever you want to be, like critical. Critical alarm from that. Then in the body of the email, you're going to have the source name, the timestamp, the state, priority, and so on. Okay. Now you can nominate a time range when this email recipient is active. So you can say, I only want to see it on Wednesday, Thursday, on Saturdays and Sundays. Okay. And we'll send an email when it goes to off normal. I'll send an email if it goes to fault, and I'll send an email when it returns back to normal, and also if it ever goes to alert. So for those transitions, I'll send an email. Okay. So that's my email recipient, but he's only working Saturdays and Sundays. And after 30 minutes, if nobody's acknowledged this alarm, it'll get escalated as an email. Okay. Now, if you wanted to, you could create a second email recipient by right-click and duplicate. And I could say that after 30 minutes, if it hasn't been acknowledged, it'll go to and you could change it to that. Okay, So at the moment, all of these escalations are false, so they wouldn't actually happen. If we do want them to happen, we can set them to true in here. So now they're true, which means that after 15 minutes, this one will get sent. After 30 minutes, this one will get sent.
So in this case, David, at the site, the PC just needs to have an internet connection and it should route emails through the Outlook or Gmail to the recipient.
That's right. So for this to work, the station where this alarm service is running, so it could be an FX80 or it could be an FX server, but wherever it is, that device has to have connectivity to the email server. Okay, so it has to get out. In this case, it has to get out on the internet, connect to Gmail, log in, and send its email. Okay, and so, yeah, that's all that has to happen before the email can actually arrive. So one way often that it happens is that if you're on a site, the customer may provide you with an email server that you can connect to and deliver your emails. Okay, so often the customer will have on site an email server that he uses to send out his own emails, and you may be able to connect to that and use that email server to send your email off-site.
If the FX80 is just connected to an internet router,
yep,
that'll work as well.
So it has to be able to resolve that name. Yeah. So short answer is yes, provided it's all set up correctly.
All right.
Yeah. And so it has to be able to resolve that name. So it has to be able to convert Gmail into, so it has to have a domain name server set up in its IP connection. Yeah, it has to resolve that name, send the email to that to Gmail. Gmail has to accept that incoming connection and accept the username and password and accept the email. So that all can work, but if Gmail suspects that it's a spam, it may not. So there can be issues with standard email servers like Gmail and the like, if in that they may be working today and everything's fine, but tomorrow they have a policy change where they start flagging this as a spam, generating spam, and they'll start blocking it. So, yeah, in most cases it's straightforward and it just works, but there can be issues around at the email server end. Yeah. And when you look in here at our outgoing account, you can see what the last failure was due to. So can we? So I can send a test email. So that email has gone into the queue. And I think in a minute's time it'll try it, and we'll see what happens. I'm expecting that it'll fail because this is not a valid username and so on. But yeah, so here the last failure was at 1:37, and authentication failed, exception, username and password not accepted. Okay, so this is where you go to look for the error, whether it was successful or not. So my queue has still got one message in it waiting to be sent. I think in a minute's time it'll try again and it'll fail again. If you go and look in your application director on your platform, you'll probably see, if I pause the output. Yeah, so when I send my email, I get an authentication failed, not accepted, learn more at, even gives you a website to okay. So this station is running on my PC. I've got a good internet connection. I'm getting out and actually connecting to mail it to Gmail. I'm getting a connection, but Gmail is coming back saying bad credentials, the username and password is not accepted, which is what I expected. Yeah, because I haven't got a valid username and password in here.
And the reason you waited for 1 minute is because of the poll rate?
That's right.
And
So
whatever's in the queue, it'll wait for 1 minute before retrying again.
That's right. So see, this is now poll failure at 39. That used to be 37. So in the meantime, it's tried 2 more times and it keeps getting the same error. Now, if I fixed it, it would then say poll success would be success, wouldn't be down anymore. It would be working and everything would be great. Yeah. And it would still have this last failure cause along with the last time it failed, but the success would be now, yeah? Or it would be recent. And we go look in that file there. No, it's not there. So that's the alarm class and being sent to email recipients, yeah?
Oh, hello, David.
Yes.
Edwin from Constar.
Yeah.
We have questions regarding the alarms.
Yep.
We have an install base that we have done it last years.
Yep.
And then we encountered like we have multiple FX80, like 5 units of FX80.
Yes.
And then each of it we have their own alarm class itself and then reroute through and back to the FX servers itself.
Yes.
So when client try to acknowledge the alarm from the FX server's main alarm notifications, the thing is sometimes we encounter that the alarms does not flash through all the FX80, which means there's some delays and there's some leftovers alarm or under the FX80 itself, and then it takes the alarms maybe for another 5 minutes or 10 minutes. The alarms came back and pop up again at the FX server's levels, and for us to solve it every month or every weeks, we have to go to individual FX80 to flush and clear all the alarm histories in order to prevent the alarm, like the false alarm or the delays alarm, came back to the FX server itself. So my question is there anything that the alarm won't synchronize itself, so it will cause this thing to delay or the alarms left over from the FX80?
So you're using, so you've set up
the alarms route to back on the FX server itself, where we acknowledge it. The thing is, it seems can't synchronize correctly. Sometimes there's a leftover alarms left back on the FX80 itself, even though from the FX server interface we see the alarm is clear after we acknowledge it. But the thing is, the alarm is still left over at the FX80 levels.
So you have, so to show the arrangement that you have.
Isn't this caused by too many alarms, so you will have some lagging or there's some miss out, because we have quite numbers of alarms triggering in one times, maybe sometimes 10 alarms or 5 alarms per FX80, so it will make laps like around 50 or around 25 to 50 alarms at one times.
So you've set up a station recipient, so the alarm gets generated in the FX80 and then it gets sent through to a station recipient, which is the FX server. And then you have route acknowledge is true.
Right. The thing is, if we have a single alarm points, we test it out. No issue and no problem itself. But when the alarms came in bunch, like 5, 10, or sometimes more than that, in multiple times, the thing is there sometimes it will be miss out. It doesn't clear and there's a leftover.
So it sounds like when it's if it's just one alarm, it all seems to work, which means you probably got it all set up correctly. And then
FX80 has been routed correctly. If we test signal points, alarm triggerings, deletes, if we synchronize and clear out itself, no issues. When there's more than 5 or 10 alarm multiples entries to the FX server itself, sometimes there's a leftover and I keep the alarms pop up again. So is there any way that we can check, or how are we going to monitor that those alarms that we have acknowledged at the FX servers level, we can maybe we can see that there's a process there that the alarm actually been synchronized and call the FX80 to clear the alarm along with the FX server?
So there would be the alarm, like there would be the application director, this view here.
Right.
There should be entries in that log file that show what's, if you can look at that when it's happening.
All right.
And there's that in the FX80 and also the equivalent in the server. And is it one point that's going alarm, normal, occurring a lot, or is it lots of different alarms that all happen at the same time?
Lots of different alarm happens in the same times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're all acknowledged, and some of them are acknowledged directly, and other ones persist and come back again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, not sure. So the thing to look at would be this system log here at the time that it's happening.
From here we can see their activities.
Yeah.
Even
And
though for
so, yeah, so you may see an alarm that you may see an entry in here that points to what's happening or not happening. Yeah.
all right, maybe we try to look into it on this, maybe see is there any leftover, so maybe some delays, or there's too much alarm came in. Maybe we need to put more delays on that.
Yeah. We could, yeah. We could set up, could we have a remote access to the site and have a look using, say, TeamViewer or something? Or
Sure, yeah, sure. We arrange with Ong later on.
Yeah, yeah. So we can maybe arrange that for probably week after next, yeah?
Yeah, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So if we go back to our alarm service, so this was all about setting up this critical alarm class, and then sending the alarms to emails and to this critical alarm console, and then we'll take that out for now. And we'll take this one out as well. Okay. So to make these connections, I just click on there and then drag and then drop it onto my destination. So I can select, if I right click on that connection and delete, if I want to put that connection back, I go to the start. So if an alarm occurs, I want to route it to my critical alarm console. Okay. If I move this around, it just takes the connection with it. In order to get this to appear, I went right click and pin slots. And that lets me expose connections to this object that aren't visible at the moment. So if I wanted to get rid of that escalate alarm number 1, I could take away that pin slot, and now it's not there. Okay. Or I could put it back by going right click, pin slots, and select it. So there it is. Oh, I selected the wrong thing. Right click, pin slots, and select that. Okay. So there it is, waiting for a connection. So now I've created this critical alarm class. If I go down to my numeric point here, so in my custom control folder, I've got a numeric point. So this would be the equivalent of a temperature input or a valve output, anything that's a number. This one is a numeric writable, which means I can set the value to 50. And now the value, see the value there is listed as 50. I can put an alarm extension on that, cause an out of range alarm extension. So if I take that and drop it onto there, it didn't like that, so I'll double click. So I'm looking at the property sheet of that point that I just created. And if I drop my outer range alarm extension onto there, I've now got an alarm extension associated with this numeric writable point. If I look at the property sheet for that alarm extension, I'm going to have a thing here called the off normal algorithm and the fault algorithm. So in the Niagara world, when they talk about a fault, they're looking at a faulty input. Okay, so if you had a temperature and it was a resistive temperature device and you shorted out the sensor, that would be a fault because the sensor is faulty. Okay, likewise, if it went open circuit, that would be a fault. Okay, if the temperature goes high, like it's 29 degrees in the room, then that is considered an off normal condition. It's not a fault, it's an off normal condition. So most times we don't actually define the fault, we just define the off normal. Okay, so if this was a temperature, we might have a high limit of 28 degrees and a low limit of 18 degrees and a dead band of 1 degree. And then I would enable the low limit and I would enable the high limit. And then the alarm class, I would choose critical alarm class. So that list of alarm classes there is the list of alarm classes that appears over in the alarm service. Okay. High temperature alarm. Okay, so I've made all of those changes. I've saved them. Now when I go back, this point has gone into alarm because 50 is above the limit I set, which was what, 28, yeah? So if I go up here to my critical alarm console, which is this guy, critical alarms, double click. There's my off normal. The source is numeric writable, so that's the name of that point. Yep. So if I rename it to something like computer room 1. So this won't update because it has to go into alarm to get that, but next time it will. It's that text message is high temperature alarm, is what we put in here. as our off normal algorithm, high temperature alarm, low temperature alarm. Okay, I can right click on this and I can acknowledge it. So it's acknowledged, but it's still there because it's still off normal. If I go down to my computer room point here and I set the value to 27.5, it's 27.5, it's still in alarm. If I set the value to 26.5, it's returned to normal. Yeah. And if I go back and look at my critical alarm console, I've got my computer room returning to normal. And I can acknowledge that. Now, by changing the name, I've created a bit of a problem. So what I probably need to do is right click and clear this alarm because so that it's out of the system. If I go back to my point, where was it? And I set the value, so 18 was the low limit. So if I make it 17.9 degrees, I get an off normal alarm in the computer room 1. It's in the critical alarm class and it's a low temperature alarm. I can acknowledge that. It's still in there, but it's now acknowledged. If I look at my computer room, look at this wire sheet, it's listed there as still being in alarm. The time that it went into alarm, the time that it was acknowledged, it hasn't returned to normal, so there's no time in there. Yeah, that's all of the information. So the low limit was 18, deadband of 1 degree. So if we go back to our console, if we set the value for this point to be 18.5, it'll still be an alarm because of the 1 degree deadband. If I set it to 19.1, it should go back to normal. So there it is, normal. It's in my alarm console. I can acknowledge it. And it's cleared out of the console. If we look back here, it's back to normal and everything's fine. Okay. So because this alarm class was critical alarm, that's why this alarm got handled the way it did. So is there any questions on any of that?
David, I think in the chat, Christy has asked how to show point alarm become pop-up on the dashboard. Like example, the high temperature alarm. I think she wants a pop-up, maybe with audio, perhaps.
Yeah. So to get it to pop up, so the normal interface is via a browser. And so what you would normally do is you'd have your you'd have this graphic here, which is your main graphic. When you edit this graphic, you can take this critical alarm console and put it on here as a alarm console. I'll just put it, actually I'll put it over here. And if we so we're not seeing that. Why aren't we seeing that? Okay, so there's our alarm. So we can show alarms on a graphic. We can show a counter that lists the number of alarms that are currently active, and you can click on that and navigate to this alarm console. If you actually want to have an alarm pop up, then currently the only way to do that is using software called the and do I have it installed? There's an alarm console. So I don't have that installed, but I can install it for the next session and show you how that works. But there is no standard way to pop up alarms from within the browser. Yeah. If you require that functionality, then there's an add-on called the alarm console, FX alarm console. So I'll install that on my PC and show you that on Thursday, if you like.
Sure. Is that a licensable feature or comes standard?
Yes. No, it's I think it's an extra license. I'll have to check. It may be included when you when you get FX server, but if you wanted to install it on a separate machine, then that separate PC would require a license.
Right.
Yep.
Please check and let us know.
Yep. So, yeah, so that's one way you could show alarms, is by putting the alarm console inside a graphic. Another way you can show alarms is by creating a link to so if I save that, and now if I click on here, it jumps me to that alarm console and lets me acknowledge that alarm, and then I can navigate back to this page here. So yeah, so the standard way of handling alarms is to provide a link that links you, that navigates you to the alarm console. So click on that and you see all of the active alarms. If you wanted to, you could display the number of alarms that are active at the moment by going to the alarm class and selecting the open alarm count. So I can navigate to that alarm, acknowledge it, and it's cleared. I go back and the open alarms is now 0. Okay, I can click on there. So now if this goes back into alarm, down to say 17 degrees. If I had the console on the graphic, you would see it here. If I didn't, I could have this link that says open alarms is 1. I'd navigate to the console. I can acknowledge that and go back. Now it's still open because it's still in alarm. Yeah, it's still off normal. If it comes good in the meantime, I action set the value back to 25, which is a good temperature. It's returned to normal. I've still got open alarms. I can click here, select that, and acknowledge it. And now it's gone. And my open alarm count is back to 0. So that's another way to do it, is to just have a link on all of your graphics, maybe up on the title page, that lists the number of open alarms and allows you to navigate to the alarm console and investigate those alarms. Okay, so that's got us to the end of today's session. The next one will be on Thursday at the same time, and we'll go through the BACnet network, how to create a BACnet network, how to create devices, in particular, how to create BACnet like JCI, like FX devices, field devices, how to map their points, and so on. So that'll all get covered in the next session, which will be on Thursday. Is there any questions on what we've done today?
I'm good.
Does
Does anybody else have any questions, team? All right, please practice what you have learned in Workbench, and when we resume back on Thursday, I think if you have any questions, you can ask David as well. Over to you, David, to close the session.
All right. Yep. So yeah, if everyone's happy, I will close it now. I'll stop. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, Jing. See you, mate.